Caleb had spent most of his life on open land. Wide skies, long fields, the sound of wind brushing through dry grass, these were the things that made sense to him. That evening was supposed to be like any other. He had just finished checking the fence line on the south side of his ranch and was riding home slowly, letting his horse rest after a long day. The sun was sinking behind the hills, turning the sky orange, and the world felt quiet and ordinary. Then he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind, a thin sound, weak and broken, drifting across the land. Caleb stopped his horse and listened harder. The wind came in steady waves, but the sound he heard was uneven, almost like a whisper, almost like someone calling. His brow tightened. No one should be out there at that hour. The nearest road was far away, and travelers rarely crossed his land. He urged his horse forward and followed the sound. The sky kept getting darker, and the thin crying noise grew clearer. He rode toward the dry creek bed, a place he rarely visited because the ground there was unstable. When he reached the edge, he stopped, leaned forward in his saddle, strained his eyes. There was someone down there. A shape was lying in the dust, hardly moving. Caleb's heart jumped. He climbed off his horse quickly and made his way down the uneven slope. Each step felt heavier as he understood what he was seeing. A woman, curled slightly on her side, her breathing shallow, her clothes torn from the rough rocks. Her face was pale, her eyes half open, and she looked like she had been fighting to stay alive for hours. When she heard his footsteps, she tried to lift her head. She couldn't. Instead, a faint voice escaped her lips. "Please, please, end my pain." Caleb froze. Not because of the words, but because of the desperation in them. It was the voice of someone who thought help would never come. Someone who believed she had been forgotten by the world. She didn't know who he was. She wasn't even asking him directly. She was speaking out of despair. He slowly knelt beside her. She tried to move again and winced in agony. Her eyes filled with tears that she was too weak to wipe away. Please, no more. Caleb wasn't a man who scared easily, but the sight of her suffering shook him. He looked at her injuries. Her leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. There were bruises on her arms. Dust and dried sweat covered her skin. She must have fallen from the ridge above and rolled down into the creek bed, unable to climb back out. Alone, hurt, and convinced she would die there. She opened her eyes again and saw the outline of his rifle slung over his shoulder. Her voice trembled. She thought he had come to end her misery, because that was the only thing she could imagine now. Caleb took a slow breath and reached for his gun knot to point it at her, but because he needed to set it aside. If a frightened animal came close, he would need it later. But in that moment, he saw fear flicker in her eyes, and that stopped him. He lowered the rifle gently on the ground, far from his hands, and held both palms up to show he meant no harm. "No," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman looked confused, almost too tired to understand. She swallowed, trying to speak again, her voice barely a breath. "Please, make it stop." Caleb shook his head. "I'm not letting you die out here." He knew the climb back up would be difficult, maybe even dangerous for someone her size who was already so weak. But he also knew leaving her there was not an option. He looked up at the ridge, planned his steps, and gathered his strength. He slid one arm under her back and one under her legs. When he lifted her, she cried out in pain, a soft, broken sound, but she didn't resist. She had no strength left to resist anything. Her head fell against his chest, and her breathing fluttered like a candle in the wind. Caleb held her carefully, trying not to jostle her injured leg, and began the slow climb out of the creek bed. It took longer than he expected. Loose rocks shifted under his boots, and more than once he had to stop to regain balance. Each time, he checked to make sure she was still breathing. She clung to consciousness with a fragile grip, drifting in and out, whispering things that made no sense, then falling silent again. When he finally reached the top, he paused, kneeling on one knee, letting his lungs fill with air. The woman's head rested against his shoulder. Her eyelashes trembled as she tried to stay awake. "You're going to be all right," Caleb murmured. Though he wasn't sure she could hear him, his horse stood a few paces away, ears alert sensing the tension in the air. Caleb lifted the woman onto the saddle first, positioning her carefully so she wouldn't fall. Then he climbed up behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her to keep her steady. She didn't speak anymore. She only breathed in small, weak gasps. The ride back to the cabin felt like the longest ride of his life. Every time the horse stepped over rough ground, the woman flinched in pain. Caleb kept whispering calm words, not because he expected her to understand, but because silence felt too cold. The sky had turned completely dark by the time he reached the cabin door. He carried her inside and gently laid her on his bed. The room was warm, lit by the glow of a small oil lamp. The light revealed more of her injuries, deep bruises, cuts from sharp rocks, swollen joints. Caleb swallowed hard. She had suffered far more than she had let on. He filled a bowl with warm water, cleaned her wounds with slow, steady motions, and wrapped her in blankets. Her breathing grew a little stronger, though she still looked fragile, like a leaf ready to crumble in his hands. "Water," she whispered. Caleb lifted a cup to her lips and helped her drink. She coughed a little, then managed a few more sips. When she pulled back, her eyes opened wider, showing a hint of awareness. "Why? Why didn't you?" She couldn't finish, but he understood the question. He sat beside her, his expression calm and steady. "Because your story isn't finished. That's reason enough." She blinked at him, confused but touched. Tears slid down her temples, not from pain this time, but from relief that someone had chosen to help her when she believed no one would. Caleb stayed awake through the night. He sat in a chair beside the bed, checking her breathing, adjusting the blankets, keeping the fire alive so the room stayed warm. Every now and then, she murmured something in her sleep, small, frightened words. Each time, he reassured her quietly until her breathing eased again. Hours passed. The night outside grew colder, but the cabin stayed warm. The woman slept deeply, safely, for the first time since her fall. Caleb watched over her without closing his eyes once. When dawn finally arrived, pale light slipped through the window. Caleb leaned forward and saw color returning to her face. Her pulse was steadier, her breathing stronger. She was still weak, but she was alive because he had refused to abandon her. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at him with a mix of confusion and gratitude. She didn't know where she was yet. She didn't remember everything. But she saw the calm face of a man who had chosen to help a stranger. She whispered, "Thank you, Caleb," who had spent years believing the world had nothing new to offer him. Felt something shift quietly inside his chest. He nodded once and said, "You're safe now." Sun rose higher, warming the room. And the long night of fear and pain finally ended. The rancher had done something she'd never expected. He chose to save her life instead of giving up on it. Caleb had not slept at all the previous night, but he didn't feel tired. His eyes stayed focused on the woman lying in his bed, her breathing slow and steady. The early morning light washed gently across the room, softening everything it touched. For the first time since he found her in the dry creek bed, she looked like she might survive. She blinked a few times, trying to adjust to the brightness, and then looked around the small cabin in confusion. Caleb moved closer so she wouldn't be frightened. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I brought you here last night." She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Caleb lifted the metal cup again and helped her drink a few sips of warm water. This time, she didn't cough as much. She swallowed slowly, and a bit of color returned to her cheeks. "My name is Caleb," he said gently. She looked at him for a moment before answering. "Emma," she whispered. The name suited her soft, simple, honest. Caleb nodded, letting the name settle in his mind. "Can you tell me what happened?" Emma looked down at her hands. They were scraped and bruised. She stared at them for a long time before speaking. "I was hiking. I wanted to clear my mind. I took a path I didn't know well. I slipped on loose rocks near the ridge. I fell. Far." She paused, breathing unevenly. Caleb didn't rush her. He simply waited. "I couldn't move my leg," she continued. "I shouted for help until my voice hurt, but no one came. I thought it was over for me." Caleb listened quietly. She wasn't angry or dramatic. She spoke like someone who had already accepted the worst. She looked up at him again, her eyes filled with embarrassment. "I'm sorry for what I said last night. I wasn't thinking right. I just wanted the pain to stop. I didn't mean—" Her voice cracked, and she looked away, ashamed. Caleb shook his head firmly. "You don't owe me an apology." His tone was calm, steady. "You were hurt, scared, and alone. Anyone would feel the same." Emma closed her eyes, clearly relieved by his understanding. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a quiet space where she could breathe again. Caleb stood up and prepared a small breakfast, nothing fancy. Just warm broth and a slice of soft bread. He had to help her sit up, supporting her gently so she wouldn't strain her injured ribs. When she tasted the broth, her eyes softened. She ate slowly, carefully, saving her strength. After she finished, Caleb checked her wounds again. Her leg was swollen, and he knew she needed real medical attention. The nearest clinic in town was full because a sickness had been spreading around the community. The doctor had told Caleb earlier in the month that he might not be able to take new cases. Still, Caleb didn't want to risk waiting too long. He told Emma he would try to contact the doctor. "Will you be all right for a few minutes?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "I think so." Caleb stepped outside, saddled his horse, and rode to the small hill where the signal was stronger. He used his old radio device to reach the doctor. After several attempts, the doctor finally answered. His voice was tired, but steady. Caleb explained everything where he found Emma. Her injuries, her condition now, the doctor sighed. "I can't take her at the clinic right now. We're full. But I'll come to your ranch in a few hours." Caleb thanked him and rode back to the cabin. When he opened the door, he found Emma struggling to sit up, using her elbows to push herself higher on the bed. Her determination made Caleb pause for a moment. Even in pain, she was trying. "You should rest," he said. Walking to her quickly, "I didn't want to be a burden," she said softly. "You've done too much already." Caleb shook his head. "I chose to help you. And you're not a burden." Emma's shoulders relaxed. She lay back down, breathing a bit more steadily. Caleb sat beside her in the chair again. They spent the next hour in soft conversations. She asked about the ranch, how long he had lived there, what kind of work he did, how he managed things alone. Caleb wasn't used to talking so much, but he found himself answering her honestly. He told her about his horses, the cattle he raised, the quiet nights, the storms that sometimes shook the windows, and the endless work that kept him busy. Emma listened carefully, almost peacefully, letting his voice bring calm to her uneasy mind. Then she talked about herself. She explained that she came from a small town 2 states away. She had been going through difficult times recently, stress, responsibilities, and moments when she felt overwhelmed. "I thought a long walk in nature would clear my head," she said with a sad smile. "I didn't expect it to nearly end my life." Caleb frowned gently. "You're here. That's what matters." She looked at him then, eyes shining softly. "Because of you," he didn't answer. He simply nodded. He didn't need praise for what he had done. Helping her felt like the natural thing to do, the only choice he could make. Around noon, they heard the doctor's truck outside. Caleb quickly stood up and opened the door. The doctor, an older man with silver hair and a concerned expression, walked in carrying a medical bag. He examined Emma carefully, checking her leg, ribs, and pulse. He asked her questions, and she answered as well as she could. Caleb stood nearby the entire time, watching with steady concern. Finally, the doctor straightened up. "She's lucky," he said. "A few more hours out there and she might not have made it." Emma's eyes widened slightly. Caleb felt his chest tighten, thinking of the moment he found her lying helpless and calling for relief. He didn't want to imagine what could have happened if he arrived too late. The doctor continued. "Her ribs are bruised, not broken. Her leg is badly sprained, but not shattered. She needs rest, warmth, food, and someone to watch over her for a few days." Emma looked at Caleb, almost afraid he would hesitate, but he nodded before she could say anything. "She can stay here," he said simply. The doctor gave Caleb some instructions on how to care for her, then left. The cabin grew quiet again. but the silence felt different now, lighter. Almost hopeful, Emma settled back into the bed, exhausted but safe. Caleb brought her fresh water, arranged the blankets, and sat beside her once more. "You didn't have to say yes," she murmured. "You've already done so much." Caleb looked directly at her, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not alone anymore. That's all." Her eyes softened, filling with gratitude that she didn't know how to express. She closed them slowly, sinking into sleep, trusting that she was safe next to him. Caleb kept his chair close to the bed. He took off his hat, placed it on the table, and leaned back, listening to her breathing. He didn't know much about Emma yet. He didn't know why she had been struggling so much before her fall, but he knew one thing for sure. She was fighting to stay alive now, and he was fighting beside her. The afternoon sun drifted across the wooden floor, creating warm lines of light in the room. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the cabin walls. Inside, the atmosphere stayed calm, steady, almost peaceful. Emma slept through most of the afternoon, but she no longer looked lost or frightened. She looked like someone who finally had a chance to heal. Caleb watched her with quiet patience, ready to help her again whenever she needed it. He didn't see himself as a hero. He didn't see himself as someone special. He simply saw a human being in pain who needed someone to stand by her side, and he had decided he would be that person. The next few days passed slowly, but each hour brought small changes that made a big difference. Emma grew a little stronger every morning, though she still needed help with nearly everything. Caleb continued to watch over her with quiet patience, never showing frustration, never acting tired even when he clearly was. Every morning began the same way. Caleb would gently wake her, making sure she drank water and ate a bit of breakfast. He always kept his voice calm, soft enough not to startle her. Emma often apologized for needing so much help, but Caleb always gave the same answer. "It's all right. You're healing." Even simple tasks like sitting up or moving her leg caused her pain, but Caleb stayed beside her, guiding her movements slowly so she didn't hurt herself again. He never rushed her. If she needed 10 minutes to shift her position, he waited those 10 minutes without a single complaint. Emma noticed the small things first. The way Caleb placed a pillow under her injured leg before she asked. How he kept the fire going at night so the cabin stayed warm. How he always made sure she had clean water beside her bed. These gestures felt simple, but they were filled with kindness, a kind she hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, as she rested on the bed with her eyes half open, she watched Caleb mend a broken saddle strap by the window. The sunlight revealed faint lines on his face, signs of someone who had lived a hard but honest life. His movements were steady, almost rhythmic, as if working with leather brought him a sense of peace. Emma spoke softly, not wanting to break the quiet too suddenly. "You live alone here?" Caleb looked up, surprised she was awake. "Yes, it's been that way for a long time." She studied him, wondering how someone could live alone for so many years without losing warmth in their heart. "Doesn't it get lonely?" Caleb hesitated. He didn't usually share personal things, but something about Emma made him speak honestly. "Sometimes, but the land keeps me busy, and the silence. It's not always a bad thing." Emma nodded gently. "I think silence scares me sometimes. It makes my thoughts louder." Caleb understood more than he said. He set the saddle strap aside and walked to her bedside. "You're safe here. Your thoughts don't have to fight anymore." Emma's eyes softened, and she looked away for a moment, touched by his simple kindness. During the following days, the routine stayed steady. Caleb cooked meals using whatever he had soup made from vegetables he grew. Soft bread he baked early in the morning, and sometimes warm tea to help settle her nerves. Emma found comfort in these meals, not because of the taste, but because she knew he had prepared them with care when she grew strong enough to sit on the porch. Caleb carried her outside, placing a blanket around her shoulders so the cold wind wouldn't bother her. The first time she breathed fresh air after days indoors. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. "It feels good," she whispered. Caleb smiled. Fresh air always helps. They sat quietly watching the horizon. The ranch stretched endlessly before them, rolling fields, wooden fences, and horses grazing peacefully. Emma found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in a long time. Something about the quiet land made her chest feel lighter. After a long pause, she spoke again. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Of course, why did you help me?" Her voice trembled slightly, as if she feared the answer. Caleb looked at her directly, the sunlight reflecting gently in his eyes. "Because you needed someone, and I was there," she swallowed, touched by the simplicity and sincerity of his words. "Most people wouldn't do what you did." Caleb shrugged lightly. "Maybe, but I couldn't leave you there. It wasn't right." Emma felt something warm spread across her chest. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet trust she hadn't known she needed. She rested her head against the cabin wall and closed her eyes, letting the peaceful silence wrap around her. As the days continued, Emma began opening up about her life before the accident. She told Caleb about the stress she had been going through work, responsibilities, things that weighed heavily on her heart. She didn't go into painful details, but she shared enough for Caleb to understand her emotional exhaustion. "I felt like I was carrying everything alone," she said one evening as Caleb fed the fire. "I thought if I kept walking that day, things would finally feel lighter. But everything just collapsed." Caleb listened without interrupting. He didn't offer dramatic advice or pretend to understand every part of her struggle. He simply said, "You're not alone anymore. Not right now." Those words stayed with her long after he spoke them. In return, Emma asked him about his life. He told her how his parents used to run the ranch before they passed away, how he learned everything about the land through hard work. He talked about the storms he had survived, the seasons that tested him, and the small victories that kept him going. Emma learned that Caleb wasn't distant. He was simply quiet. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was strength. One evening, when a soft rain began to tap against the cabin roof, Emma found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks: calmness. She watched the raindrops roll down the window, while Caleb prepared a small meal in the kitchen. "This place feels safe," she said. Caleb turned, meeting her eyes with a small nod. "It's just a simple cabin." "It's not the cabin," she corrected gently. "It's you." Caleb paused, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being spoken to with such honesty. But Emma didn't expect an answer. She simply wanted him to know. That night, Emma slept more peacefully than she ever had since the accident. She no longer woke up in fear or confusion. Her breathing was steady, her face relaxed. When morning came, she asked Caleb something new. "Can I try standing today?" Caleb raised an eyebrow, unsure if she was ready. "Only if we go slowly." He helped her sit up, supporting her with an arm behind her back. She placed her feet on the ground carefully. Her injured leg trembled slightly, and Caleb remained close, ready to catch her if she fell. She tightened her grip on his arm. "I'm scared." "I've got you," Caleb said simply. She took a breath and pushed herself upward. For a moment, her legs wobbled, and she leaned heavily on him. But she stayed standing. A surprised smile spread across her face. Caleb steadied her. "You did it." Emma felt her throat warm with emotion. "I stood." "Caleb, I actually stood." "You're stronger than you think," he replied. They practiced for a few minutes each day after that. Little steps. Tiny victories. Emma gained confidence with each attempt, and Caleb stayed beside her during every moment. Patient and steady. Their bond grew quietly, not through dramatic speeches or grand actions, but through small, honest moments. Emma found comfort in his presence. Caleb found purpose in helping her heal one afternoon. As the sun began to set and filled the cabin with golden light, Emma looked at Caleb and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you." Caleb looked away, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to. Just focus on getting better." But Emma shook her head. "You've saved my life. Not just my body, but my hope." Caleb didn't answer right away. He simply sat beside her, watching the sky outside turn orange and pink. For him, her recovery was enough. Seeing her try again, breathe easier, trust the world a little more, was all the thanks he needed. The evening air grew cooler, and the cabin grew quiet once more. But this time, silence was comforting. A shared silence between two people who had found unexpected strength in each other. As presence. Emma wasn't fully healed yet. She still had a long way to go, but she knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer alone on that journey, and Caleb, without ever planning it, had become the steady hand guiding her through the darkness toward the light again. The morning light fell gently across the wooden floor of the cabin. Emma opened her eyes slowly, feeling the familiar mixture of soreness and strength. Each day brought a change, sometimes small, sometimes surprising, but never backward. Today felt different from the moment she woke. The air felt clearer. Her body felt stronger. And somewhere deep inside her, there was a sense that a new chapter was beginning. Caleb knocked softly on the doorframe before entering, carrying a tray with warm tea and toast. He always did that, knocked, even though it was his own home. It was his quiet way of showing respect. "You're awake early," he said with a small smile. Emma nodded. "I feel good today." Caleb placed the tray beside her and helped her sit up. She no longer needed full support, just a steady hand. Her movements were slow but controlled. He noticed she winced far less than before. "That's a good sign," Caleb said. She sipped the tea carefully, letting the warmth spread through her chest. "Do you think I can try walking a little more today?" Caleb studied her face, noticing the determination in her eyes. "Yes," he said, "but only if we go at your pace." Emma smiled, grateful for his constant balance, never restricting, always steady. After breakfast, Caleb helped her stand. She held onto his arm with one hand and the edge of the wooden table with the other. Her injured leg felt stiff, but it no longer felt like it would collapse. She drew a deep breath as if preparing for something important. "Ready?" Caleb asked. Emma nodded. They took the first step together, then a second. Caleb stayed close, but let her lead. She focused on each movement, feeling her muscles wake up and remember their purpose. After a few careful steps, she reached the opposite side of the cabin. She leaned against the wall, breathing a little heavier, but smiling brightly. "You did it," Caleb said. Emma laughed softly, the sound full of relief. "I really did." Each day after that, they practiced a little more. Emma walked across the cabin, then across the porch, holding onto the railing as she slowly regained balance. Sometimes she stumbled, sometimes she felt discouraged, but Caleb stayed beside her for every small victory and every moment of doubt. One morning, after 2 full weeks at the ranch, Emma surprised Caleb by saying, "I think I want to try walking outside, without you holding me." Caleb studied her carefully. She was standing straighter now. Her leg, though still wrapped, was strong enough to support most of her weight. Her eyes held determination, not reckless confidence, but a quiet readiness. "All right," he said, "but I'll be close." They stepped outside into the cool morning air. The field stretched out in front of them, golden and peaceful under the rising sun. Emma placed one hand on the railing, took a breath, and stepped forward. Her leg trembled, but she didn't stop. She took a second step, then a third. Caleb kept a few feet behind her, close enough to help if she needed it, far enough to let her feel her own strength. Emma walked slowly across the porch, reaching the wooden post at the far corner. She touched it lightly, steadying herself as she looked out over the land. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Caleb stood beside her. "It always is." Emma turned to him, her eyes warm. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Caleb looked away for a moment, the sunlight catching the outline of his jaw. "I never saw giving up as an option," he said. "You were fighting from the moment I found you. I just helped you finish the fight." Emma felt emotion rise in her chest. Not overwhelming, but deep and honest. She looked at the ground, blinking softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you didn't come that evening." Caleb didn't say anything at first. Instead, he looked toward the ridge where he had found her, the dusty creek bed far beyond it. "I'm just glad I was there," he said finally. Later that afternoon, Emma surprised Caleb again. "Can you take me to the place where you found me?" she asked. Caleb hesitated. "Are you sure you want to see it?" "Yes," she said gently. "I want to understand how far I've come." Caleb saddled his horse but didn't let Emma ride. She wasn't ready yet. Instead, they walked slowly, with him pushing a small wooden cart he had modified so she could sit when she got tired. She walked part of the way and sat when her leg needed rest. When they reached the ridge, Emma gazed down at the dry creek bed. The memory of lying there felt distant now, like a dream she had finally woken from. She stood at the edge and closed her eyes for a moment. "This is where I thought my life would end," she whispered. Caleb stood beside her, hands resting in his pockets. But it didn't. Emma turned to face him. The wind gently moved strands of her hair, and her eyes shined with quiet strength. "No, you gave me a chance I didn't know I still had." Caleb's expression softened, but he didn't say anything. He never made moments bigger than they needed to be, and Emma appreciated that more than he knew. They returned to the cabin slowly. Emma felt tired but proud. She had faced the place that once filled her with hopelessness, and she hadn't crumbled. Days turned into another week. Emma's recovery became faster. She started helping Caleb with small chores around the cabin, folding blankets, slicing vegetables, feeding the chickens. She laughed more. She rested easier. She breathed deeper. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and filled the cabin with orange light, Emma sat at the table and looked at Caleb. "I think I'm almost ready to go home." Caleb paused in the middle of polishing a bridle. His hand stopped, and he looked up. "You sure?" She nodded, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I can walk now. I can take care of myself again, and I need to return to my life." Caleb swallowed, hiding the heaviness he felt. "You've worked hard for this," Emma smiled softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." The next morning, Caleb helped her pack a small bag. She insisted on doing most of the work herself, wanting to prove she was truly ready. When the doctor arrived to check on her one last time, he smiled warmly. "You've healed well," he said. "You can travel safely now." Emma thanked him, then turned to Caleb. Her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something quiet and strong. He walked her to the edge of the ranch where the dirt road began. His truck waited nearby to take her into town. Emma turned to him. "I'll never forget what you did for me." Caleb nodded, his voice steady. "Just promise me one thing. Don't give up on yourself again." Emma felt tears gather in her eyes, not from pain but from overwhelming thankfulness. She stepped closer, resting her hand lightly against his arm. "I won't," she said, "because now I know I'm stronger than I thought, and because someone showed me that hope can appear in the most unexpected place." Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. His gentle nod said everything. Emma climbed into the truck. Before closing the door, she looked at him one last time. "I'll come back. One day. I promise." Then the door shut, and the truck slowly rolled forward down the dusty road. Caleb stood there, watching until the truck disappeared around the bend. The ranch grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet one, filled with the memory of a life saved and a bond formed in the most unexpected way. Emma kept her promise. Weeks later, she returned not because she needed help, but because she wanted to see the place where she found strength again. And every year after that, she visited the ranch. Grateful to the man who had given her a second chance at life, Caleb never asked for thanks. But in his heart, he carried a simple truth. Sometimes the most unthinkable act is not walking away, not ending someone's suffering, but choosing to carry them through it.